I always respect somebody that has a go, that tries to do something. What's the worst that could happen?
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Sharon Sutton.
David Wilkinson has worked in the financial services market for 40 years, the last 30 of which have seen him and his family based on the Isle of Man. He joined NFU Mutual in 2012 to lead the Isle of Man office going forward and personally provide and ensure the team continues to offer the highest level of service possible to new and existing clients alike for their personal and commercial queries. He reminisces about life growing up in Singapore and the northeast of England and shares how he ended up settling on the island and raising a family. David's great passions are football and golf. Do listen to this week's conversation with David Wilkinson in episode 79 of Island Influencers. Welcome to David Wilkinson from NFU Mutual, joining me today in St John's Mill. We just got back from Greens, having had a very nice lunch.
It was a very nice lunch, Sharon. Thank you.
I know, you're welcome. And so David is joining me today. And so without further ado, David, let's, as now the leader of the NFU Mutual office here, let's if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners all about you.
So the last 10 years I've been the manager of NFU Mutual's office in the Isle of Man, very well-known farming and insurance company. 260 offices around the British Isles and one in the Isle of Man, which I really enjoy working with the colleagues there, the customers that we deal with. Obviously, you and I do some work together and have known each other for a few years.
Yeah.
In terms of jobs that I've done, it's probably the most enjoyable one, which is unusual perhaps as you get towards the end of your career, but I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, well, I mean that's great. Maybe all the things that you've chosen to up to now to get you to do what you
this position,
you love. Then that's great. So, where did you grow up?
So I was born in Darlington, northeast of England. Very proud of coming from the northeast of England. Still support Middlesbrough Football Club for my sins. I was indoctrinated. I've indoctrinated my children. Still got some family left over there, but that's where I grew up. But my dad was in the Ministry of Defence.
Oh, was he?
So the Navy.
Gosh.
So he was responsible for stores for Navy ships around the world, the British Navy.
Is that called the quartermaster, or is that?
They're called the Royal Fleet Auxiliary.
I know.
They would be responsible. There's actually more boats working for the auxiliary than there was from the Navy, I think I remember him telling me. And he would be responsible, he used to say, from anything from a nuclear weapon to a washing machine that went on a Navy boat. And the main MOD base in the UK was in Bath. Mm-hmm. But when I was very young, I lived in Singapore for 3 years, which was quite common. There was quite a lot of sort of service-type roles out there in the sort of late 60s, early 70s. So that was my first memories was living in Singapore when I was little.
Wow. What particular memories?
I think just the weather, the fact that we only used to go to school in the morning and then we'd play in the pool all afternoon because it was too warm to go to school. It was like a British naval base that we lived on. Probably more from my mum and dad, even now, would still go on about Singapore and how what a great place it was.
Yeah.
My brother was born there, my younger brother was born there. So my first memories living there. I've been meaning to get back. I was due to go back and visit when we had the ice. Do you remember the ash clouds? Over Iceland a few years ago.
Yeah,
which seems like a long time ago now. But I was due to go then and never made it.
10 years since that.
Yeah,
maybe?
Probably. I don't know exactly when COVID has got in the way of all these other disasters, but it was a short-term disaster that affected my trip.
Oh no!
So maybe one day I'll get back.
Right. Okay. Sounds like a plan. You stayed out there for how?
3 years.
3 years,
and then came back to the northeast of England. So a couple of times in my life, I've sort of come back to a place.
Yeah. What age would you have been then?
So I was 7 when I moved back,
and
then went back to the northeast of England, where there was a depot that my dad worked in.
Yeah.
And then when I was 13, my dad got promoted to Bath or Bath, depending on
don't
I
know.
said Bath when I first went there, but it
Okay.
soon got knocked out of me, that
Yeah, I'm
sort
sure.
of northeast accent. So I moved and went to school in Bath, did my O-levels, did my A-levels at school in Bath. Great place to live in terms of, very cosmopolitan, lots of tourists, lovely environment. Bit of a contrast from the northeast, but it was still a great place to live. And then when I was 18, did my A-levels, I had a sort of choice of either going down the sort of university route
Yeah.
or joining the world of work. And I went down the world of work.
Right.
Not sure why. It was just, perhaps didn't give a lot of thought to it at the time. And I joined Lloyds Bank
Right.
in 40 years ago this year.
Yeah, time flies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very polite. And my first day at work, I met my future wife, my wife now, sorry, my wife.
Yeah.
Because she worked in the bank as well.
Wow.
We didn't get married straight away. It was a few years later.
Yeah.
But that was
Wow.
a small branch of Lloyds Bank in Bath,
Right. Very nice.
which again, a lovely place to work. And ever since, thinking about what I've been career-wise, I've always worked in smaller teams within financial services,
Yeah.
banking, insurance, etc. And never in a sort of head office environment, always in like a servicing public and customers and working in smaller teams, which I think back now, and it's probably I was just what I've really enjoyed and what I've kept on doing all these years.
Oh, no, good. So what brought you to the Isle of Man then? Were you still at Lloyd's when you came here?
No, I did a few years with Lloyds, little dead man shoes at the bank at the time, that if you had to be a certain age before you could be a manager and you had to pass
Yes.
certain exams.
Yeah, I remember those days.
So when I worked in the bank, one of our customers was Leeds Permanent Building Society, and they were literally just round the corner. So I knew the team there. And building societies back in those days pretty much did lending for mortgages, obviously, and savings, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
And they had a program for management trainees, and it was a 2-year program. They would put you through lots of training and courses, fast track you, I suppose you'd call it now.
Yeah.
And at the end of 2 years, they would give you your first opportunity to work in a branch, much smaller than a bank. But the principles of sort of working in a mutual organisation, even then, the building societies perhaps lost their way a little bit with mutuality. But
I guess they would have been mutual back then, though.
they were there, yeah, later on. So you had people like the Halifax, the Leeds building site, Nationwide, etc., etc. Some of these names still exist. So that was a really good grounding. Having done the work in the bank, to learn some of the principles of financial services, and then to join the building society world just as building societies were starting to move away from traditional mortgages and traditional savings. So that was a really good grounding. Passed after my 2 years the internal training qualification.
Well done.
Moved down to Portsmouth for a couple of years. And then while I was in Portsmouth, just got married, this vacancy for the Isle of Man came up. So we had like internal bulletins or circulars.
Yeah.
So this is 30 years ago. And they need somebody to come over and help in the Isle of Man, because the Isle of Man market was just...
It was just setting off, wasn't it?
Oh, it was
30 years ago.
crazy. Yeah, and it was the first time they'd allowed building societies into the Isle of Man. It was new legislation.
Gosh.
6 building societies.
Yeah,
And they
the
basically
early 90s, yeah.
Yeah, they needed some help. So I worked, came over, was lucky enough to get offered the role. Me and my wife moved over, and we worked in Strand Street. I worked in Strand Street in the Leeds Permanent Building Society branch.
I remember it, yes.
Yeah. And what I soon got involved in was mortgages and savings. So it was quite a busy branch to deal with. But we also had the international side of the operation as well as the local.
Yeah.
I worked in the local operation. And what I found straight away is that I would be helping somebody with a mortgage or with a savings account. And then on the Saturday afternoon when I was walking down Strand Street, I would then see that person again,
Yeah.
And that's when then the sort of dawning of living in a sort of Isle of Man community and the things that I've enjoyed ever since of living in that community first realised.
Right,
So
okay.
a lot of satisfaction in helping people get their first house or move to a bigger house. Occasionally, even now, people still say, "You helped me with my first mortgage."
Isn't that nice?
Which is quite a nice thing to say from all those years ago.
Yes. So what turned your head to go to, was it the concept of going from one mutual to another, to NFU?
No, there was like that developed really, having gone through the banking world and worked in 3 or 4 other banks, and then a crossroads in my career about what did I do next. And NFU Mutual had a vacancy for a branch manager 10 years ago, we were based in the outskirts of Douglas. We've since now moved to South Quay.
Yeah, we were near neighbours back
That's
then.
right,
We were just
yeah.
around the corner in Media House at the time.
But it was in some ways going back to my roots a little bit of working in a mutual organisation, the principles.
Yeah.
But NFU had sort of kept that principle going. My mum was a farmer's daughter, there's farming in the family. And then that sort of like community of working in the rural, working with businesses, working with a small group of colleagues is something I've really, really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And maybe thrived again and sort of got enjoyment back in your career again.
Sure.
Perhaps towards the end of it.
Yeah. So for a time, though, you weren't just running the Isle of Man branch, though, were you? You've been running Bury?
Yes, that's right. So NFU had a number of different offices that had the same style about them, or the same sort of objectives, and our sister branch was Bury in Lancashire. So I got asked one day if I would help out looking after Bury sort of on a part-time basis, just to help out while they were recruiting a new manager. And 5 years later I was still doing that.
Yeah.
So I travelled backwards and forwards for the best part of 5 years, working in the Bury office as well as working in the Isle of Man office. And I had some interesting ferry crossings and some interesting plane journeys.
I
and
can imagine.
Hiring cars at Manchester
Yeah.
Airport, etc., etc.
Sure.
But actually the customers themselves that I was dealing with was very, very similar, and the people I was dealing with were very similar. But just before COVID, so I think it would have had a natural change anyway. Just before COVID, I stopped doing that, and just for the last 2 years.
Good timing, really.
It was good timing, yeah.
Yeah.
It was coincidental, but it was good timing. It was probably needed to move on, so they eventually
Yeah,
appointed
it's a lot of
somebody else.
disruption in your life there to have to go. So I mean,
Yeah.
well done you doing it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. So NFU Mutual, it's quite an interesting organisation, isn't it? Because there's not many of the branches that have like a manager like
Yeah.
you. There's most of them are, if I understand rightly, agents.
That's right.
Which is different. If you could explain the difference to our listeners, that would be great.
NFU Mutual been around well over 100 years. Obviously, predominantly farming originally, but now a full range of insurance services. And the 250 to 260 offices that we have, from the top of Scotland to the bottom of Cornwall, almost all of them are what we would call agents of NFU Mutual. So they run their own business, and they then get support from NFU Mutual to run that business. So they're almost self-employed
So
operations.
tied to NFU as a product provider, right?
And
okay.
then on the Isle of Man, in terms of the product offering that we do here, we are what we call internally as a salaried office. So me and my colleagues are employees of NFU Mutual. It doesn't really make much difference to the clients and the service that we provide, but it's a slightly different operation.
Yeah.
And it works really well. The Isle of Man and NFU Mutual goes back to 1946.
Yeah.
So we have a very strong relationship with the Manx National Farming Union. So they obviously there to represent farming matters and rural matters on the island. We're there to help with the insurance, but as two organisations, we work very closely together.
Yeah, I've interviewed Sarah Comish relatively recently from the Manx NFU, and prior to that, her predecessor, Andy.
Andy, yeah.
Yeah.
So Andy now works in DEFRA. So
he does, yeah.
So we spend a lot of time working with the farming community. We had recently, we do things at the Royal Show and the Southern Show. We do things on mental awareness for the rural community. We do things for general health and safety. So we do as much as we can, but certainly in the last 25 to 30 years, we've expanded as a company to look at other types of insurance clients as well. So.
Yeah, but it's general insurance, right? It's
general insurance.
Yeah, it's not financial services.
No, so we would help you with your property, we would help you with your motor vehicles, we'd help you with your liability needs, but we don't offer the types of services that Thornton do. So we complement each other quite well.
Yeah, no, it's been, how long ago was it?
7 or 8 years?
Yeah, so the Mutual made a decision, didn't they, to stop doing financial services because of the differences in regulation between
that goes
the UK.
back. It goes back a long time. But you and I came up with this idea that we could perhaps, look after our clients' needs when they need advice on products that we can't offer on the island.
Yeah.
to introduce them to your good selves.
Yeah, and the same with the other insurances, the professional indemnity, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so a lot of commercial organisations now think about things like cyber insurance. They think about directors and officers liability insurance. That's not something that NFU Mutual does on the Isle of Man. So again, we have a relationship with a company called Phoenix, who can provide that service.
Yeah.
So that sort of complements what we do.
Yeah.
And it works well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, sort of stick to, in a way, being collaborative, but also stick to what you're a specialist at. But no, we have got to know each other a bit more over the years with things like the days at the agricultural show. We get to rock up with you guys with your big yellow flags and
so that's
that's fun.
That community aspect of something like the agricultural shows. There's lots of other examples, young farmers events, etc., that happen. It is still a job. We work in an office and we have customers and we have administration work to do, etc. We deal with claims, so that's the other side of the job, which is very important. So we had the bad weather at the beginning of this week, and so we're helping clients.
Busy now.
Yeah, we're helping clients on the other side of insurance, which is really important. But that sort of community involvement, which probably goes for lots of things on the island. Certainly, I've found that in the many years I've lived here. It's nice when you can sort of demonstrate that within your job.
Yeah, and it's such a fab community, generally speaking, and particularly farming, I suppose. Yeah. So if we do the normal question, I get some really interesting answers out of, no pressure. But if you don't mind me asking, and I have to sort of ask this in my day job, so I'm going to ask you anyway. So what's your earliest memory of money, David? I mean, how was it growing up, being from a Ministry of Defence family? What was any particular behaviours or specific knowledge that?
I definitely seem to remember sort of getting involved in doing jobs and pocket money and cutting the grass and helping older family members and friends with paper rounds and things, perhaps younger than happens now. But my first sort of real memory of money was that I was 6 or 7 when decimalisation came out.
So was I. Funny enough. So
it was like 1970, 1971.
Yeah.
And what I distinctly remember was that a sixpence became 2.5p and a shilling became 5p, and the effect that made on me going to the shop for sort of Mars bars or Milky Ways or whatever I was into at that particular time, and pocket money. So I sometimes, perhaps being the sort of old man of the office, talk about things like
this. What do you mean, old man?
And, decimalisation. That's definitely my first memory of how it moved from old money, as they called it, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
To decimalisation.
And would relentlessly convert it back, just for whatever reason, but mental arithmetic, I suppose.
But back to insurance, horses are still guineas.
Yes.
And so, there's still some sort of
So
still elements.
Do you think anything of that particular, behaviours and knowledge that you had around that time, what made you choose to go into a career in financial services and insurance?
I don't think I gave an awful lot of thought about going to university or joining a bank. There were bank opportunities at the time, or financial services at the time. But what I probably thought about since is the value of it. One of the memories I still have is when I was 18, 19, and I was working on the counter in the bank on Christmas Eve. So in those days, the bank opened till lunchtime on Christmas Eve. And I remember a young mother coming in. So I was 18. She would have been probably in her mid-20s. And she came in with her 2 young children. And she was looking to extend her overdraft on Christmas Eve.
Gosh.
So that was quite heavy, and thankfully we did the right thing. The manager came out and supported. But that sort of then, I've still remembered that story a long many years later as people who have money to invest, but also people who have difficulties. So in the mortgage world, occasionally people couldn't pay their mortgages, because of recession or because they'd been made redundant, etc. So trying to remember that side of the equation. Probably not so much now with insurance. It's more maybe now about the difficulties of somebody who has a serious claim. So I met a gentleman last year whose house had burnt down.
Oh dear.
And sort of trying to do the right thing to support him and his family, not just in terms of financial improvement to help him, but that sort of emotional side of it, which thankfully only happens very rarely, but is an element of that side of the role rather than purely the sort of wealthier clients, for example, looking after both. So that's probably some memories that I think back on, that hopefully those values I've been able to keep consciously or subconsciously over the years.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing those stories. Of all the things that you've done throughout your life so far, David, what's given you the most fulfillment from a business and a personal perspective, do you think? I mean, you've described pretty well there the values and helping others. That seems to have given you a great deal of personal satisfaction and a business perspective. But
probably in terms of personal, very happy long marriage, and 2 great children are doing really well at the moment as they set out on their life. But one particular thing I really enjoyed doing, don't do it now, but did it for about 10 years, was I used to play football. I played football on the Isle of Man. I used to get that sort of office frustration out on a Saturday afternoon. But when my football days ended and my son started playing football and my daughter started playing football, I did fairly early on, because I was encouraged by a couple of people to do my sort of football coaching badges.
Oh, great.
So I really enjoyed over the sort of probably 10 years. And I helped mostly at Laxey, where a lot of people have done football coaching at Laxey, but also got involved through my son with the Isle of Man, under 16s and under 18s, and I really got a lot of satisfaction out of doing that, taking the boys away to play in the UK, and also visiting teams to the Bowl. So I probably did that for about 10 years on and off. It really made me appreciate what it's like to be a teacher, etc. When I just tried to help for 3 or 4 hours a week rather than 6 or 7 hours a day. But that was probably one thing I've really enjoyed. I've did it and moved on now, but that would be one example outside of the work environment where I got a lot of enjoyment from.
That's a really good story to share there too. So what do you do to relax now, keep your life in balance? I know you're a pretty good golfer.
Well, not quite as good as somebody else who lives and works very close to where I'm sat at now with your husband Julian, but I played golf pretty much since I stopped playing football. I'd love to get to a single-figure handicapper. I don't know whether that'll ever happen, but there's not many sports where you can still play at a decent competitive as you get older.
Yeah, the handicapping system appears to be really inclusive.
Yes,
it appears to encourage
That's right.
that.
It does include juniors and people of a certain age, etc.
You've got your T ranges and.
Yep. Yeah. So I play at Ramsey now. I played at Mount Murray for a long time. So I really enjoy my golf.
Were you captain?
I was captain of Mount Murray in 2020. Yeah. So a lot of my friends called me Captain COVID. Oh, no. Because being a captain of a golf club when COVID struck perhaps wasn't the best timing.
I don't know.
So it was a different sort of challenge. It was a different sort of challenge than being a captain. But that was very rewarding. Yeah. The weather forecast doesn't look so good tomorrow morning.
It doesn't look good all weekend, does it really?
No. Whereas it's lovely now. Golf would probably be the main thing that I get involved in. Still, I do quite a little Manx Heritage, so I quite like going to. I'm a member of Manx National Heritage. Right. And me and my wife, whoever get the opportunities to go across, especially to see the children. I love going into a Manx National Trust or an English Heritage and flashing the Manx National Trust card.
Yes,
and
indeed.
Getting in. So that's sort
excellent.
I enjoyed history at school, so it's a little bit of interest in that now.
What would be your favourite site here to go to of Manx National Heritage properties?
Probably Howsam and Annan in Peel. I still think that's like when that was set up, and it was like, I don't know if you, I think it was I don't remember the name of the gentleman, but it was like very linked to the Jorvik Centre in York, and they copied some of the ideas from that.
Yes,
I only went there a few months ago. I suppose with the Isle of Man, you go backwards time and time again, don't you? So when you see little changes or new exhibitions that they do at Douglas and Peel quite regularly, I quite like going to those.
Okay.
Not with any degree of expertise, but just interest.
And what do you think are the best things about living in the Isle of Man then?
Probably that community spirit, which I can demonstrate through my job as well as sort of outside interests. Friendships, over 30 years, got lots of different friendships, lots of different people that we've met. I also like the opportunity, though, to go across and experience different things, etc. But in terms of I suppose people would say that it's a bit of a corny phrase, but the quality of life. I lived in Jersey for 3 years, when I worked in the bank, and that was a great experience. Mm-hmm. But you then could compare Jersey and the Isle of Man, and I think we've got it right in terms of a place to live, etc.
Yeah, I've been to Jersey a couple of times, and it struck me that the biggest open space was the airfield. It's a bit short on space there, aren't they?
That's right. Yeah, it's much more claustrophobic.
Yeah,
So it's probably those general quality of life things that we all probably experience about the island.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. So, but what would you say the main challenges are we face as an island?
I think probably I can see it in my own, my own life, in that the perhaps younger people that I work with, I can see it in my two children, what sort of opportunities they've got and what they want to get out of their careers, and sometimes that means leaving the island. Obviously for things like university or for professional opportunities that perhaps don't exist here. It's how we encourage them to maybe either stay and give them more opportunities through education and college, or give them the encouragement to move back.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? What would you do? How would you fix that?
That's a bit of a big question for me to answer. I think there's definitely something about trying to be more imaginative on industries, opportunities, whether it's, green and sustainable industries, whether it's not maybe just falling into certain areas that become attractive for a few years on the Isle of Man. It's things that have got more longevity. I haven't got the answers. One thing that I always think, though, is that people who think about these things and try and do something about them are people that we should encourage.
Yeah,
and,
I agree.
Criticising people because they're doing something it sometimes annoys me in the nicest sense of the phrase, because, at least they're having a go. At least they're trying. Trying to be positive.
Yeah. Well, that's the point of this podcast, I suppose, is to spread positive ideas as opposed to just moaning about things. And I know you say that you deal with wider spheres than farmers, but are there any particular that's not a quick fix for farming, but what about farming? What's the biggest challenges and opportunities there, do you think? The
biggest opportunity, and which is a challenge for the farming community at the moment, is being able to use the resources that we've got here, which obviously is linked to the Isle of Man. So the grasslands that we've got here, the hills, the livestock that we can raise well here, is trying to sort of work on that food sustainability. What can we do more of? What are we good at in terms of vegetable growing, etc.? When somebody like the bakery sadly closes, the effect that has on the farming community. Yes, obviously there are opportunities to fill those gaps, but what can we do here?
Do you think by having more harvestable, processable crops here would...
That would be one example.
Yeah.
Using our advantages, which there's plenty of land, there are restrictions, there's plenty of people who are keen to try and do new things to encourage them. Obviously, the government and the government bodies have got so many plates to spin. Yeah. But food is pretty important. And being able to be more self-sufficient. I was watching The Good Life on telly the other day.
Tom and Barbara.
It just came on and I sat there and watched it. And maybe that's an extreme example, but, some of the things that they were doing 30, 40 years ago, perhaps there's an opportunity to do that. You do see more small holdings and more people trying to have allotments, etc., etc.
Yeah, you absolutely
maybe encouraging that type.
Howard Quayle's got a bunch of them, hasn't he? Outside of Moran, up from the Braid, there's a whole load of fields there with lots of allotments.
My wife has an allotment that she goes to with her friends, so she really enjoys the sort of health benefits of doing it as well as the camaraderie of doing it together.
No, I do too. I love it.
And so it's those sorts of it's not sustainable for younger people to leave the Isle of Man and not come back. So thinking of different ways that we can sort of slowly grow the economy without throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. So what have you got planned next? What's the Mutual got planned here, and what have you got planned as a business?
Probably more of the same. We probably think about our objectives and what we do to support our customers and try and, win more customers without being too sort of businessy focused. So I at the moment sort of thinking of a sporting analogy, a football analogy. It's like a 1-year contract, 1-year extension. What do we do in 2023? What do we do differently? Keep on doing some of the same things, but maybe tweak. So trying to do more things with younger farmers. Sadly, at the moment, I don't meet many farmers that are younger than me. So trying to do more towards that, more towards some supporting the local economy. But obviously, very much aware of the cost of living crisis, and insurance is a very important thing for customers to bear in mind because of the, what could happen in terms of a claim, etc. But to try and be supportive as we can, with different strategies to help them as it comes along.
Sure.
Also develop the team. So we do quite a lot as an organisation with both internal skills improvements, but also we support them with CII examinations.
Yeah, great.
Which is something that's much easier to do now at home and online.
Yeah, it's challenging. It's cost-wise, so well done for doing that.
Yeah, we support people to do that.
Yeah, it's important. Exceedingly important. So, what in the context of running a small team, what would be your number one tip for being in your role for running a successful business?
So for me, it's very much teamwork. So everybody's got an important role to play. I believe everybody should speak to a customer. If you're not speaking to a customer, then what's the point of your role? And I would always, if somebody wanted to speak to the manager, help and support them. I would always want a colleague of mine to have a go, try and deal with a query, try and deal with an administrative task. What we do as a company is that we tend to take our time with training people, putting them through different qualifications and different licenses, so that they have the competency to be able to talk to people and support them. And that usually has proved to be very successful based on some of the team. A lot of the team have been there 10, 12 years, etc.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have colleagues who've decided to move on because of opportunities. There's 13 of us in the office, so there's only limited opportunities. Some people don't want to leave the Isle of Man, which is, we've got respect for as well.
You've got a nice little team there.
Yeah, nice self-development. We have a great office on South Quay, so the best view I've ever had looking out of an office.
It is in a great. It's in a very advantageous position with your parking outside.
Yeah, people.
It's very useful.
Come in for a cup of tea as we try to advertise ourselves. So probably more of the same. Sharon. A lot of business would say that, but more of the same, allowing for the challenges that we're going to have. Yes.
Okay. Well, there's some good stuff in there. Moving on to our last set of questions, which our listeners always like to hear the answers to. So, are there any books that you've read recently that you would like to recommend to our listeners as a source of inspiration, self-development, philosophy, anything like that? What have you read recently?
I'd like to pretend I read lots of management books, but I'd be fibbing.
No, don't.
The one I'm reading at the moment is Bob Mortimer's semi-autobiography. He's written a couple of books. He comes from the same town as me in the northeast. He's a couple of years older than me, and he writes very funny books. He's written a couple of very funny books, and what I like is like his sense of humour. And he writes these little snippets of things he did as a youngster, etc. And he'll write 3 or 4 of them in a chapter. And he says at the beginning of the chapter, only a couple of these are true and one of them's not. He doesn't ever tell you which is which. So it's really intriguing. I'd love to meet the guy and ask him.
That's brilliant. There's a radio programme, Radio 4, just like that.
So that's the one I'm reading at the moment. And my wife did comment that I laughed out loud while I was reading it on the ferry recently.
It's always a sign of a good book when you laugh. Your belly laughs out that laugh. So
that's one I'd recommend.
Yeah, fantastic. And who inspires you?
Yeah, I wish I could give you a name, but probably family. I probably met lots of people over the years in my job. Family, colleagues. I'd like to think it's peers, so people who done similar things to me. People who've given me little bits of advice. So I remember when I became the golf captain, a couple of good friends gave me some tips about doing that, which stuck with me. And also, I think I mentioned it earlier, so it might be repetition, is that, if certainly people like politicians and people in the public environment who sometimes gets criticised for whatever, the fact that they're having a go, they're trying to make a change, they're trying to do something, they should be encouraged rather than... Sometimes they get things wrong, obviously, but they're having a go.
Having their foot in their mouth.
Yeah, but I think, I always respect somebody that has a go, that tries to do something. What's the worst that could happen, at least by having a go and trying to change things.
Yes.
Rather than being a critic on the sideline, if you take my meaning.
You're quite right. So what's your favourite quote, David?
So the one that I probably use occasionally with my family, I was told it was an American proverb, and there is no U-Haul behind the hearse. And anybody who's been to America will remember the sort of U-Haul see in films.
Yes.
The U-Haul truck, which I think people use to move. And I've always sort of thought of it in two ways. One is that, too much baggage people carry around maybe in their minds and in their worlds, try and let it go. And then I've also thought about it in the context of worldly belongings,
Too much stuff.
Too much stuff.
Yeah, that's an excellent saying. That's a really excellent saying.
And I've always remembered it, so whenever I get the chance to share it.
Yeah, so over lunch before you said another one, which was don't look back.
Yeah.
I think is also...
That's a bit boring, that one.
No, it's worthy. It's definitely worthy of mention. It's the things we live our lives by, and
But so no regrets.
Yeah, and where can people go to learn more about you and the NFU Mutual? And
they just need to put NFU Mutual Douglas, NFU Mutual Isle of Man into a search engine. They're very welcome to come in and see us at South Quay. We're on Twitter. We are on Facebook, but probably the simplest way is by ringing the office or calling in.
Okay.
We're still in the nicest sense of the phrase, old-fashioned, that you come in, you meet us, or we'll come to you.
Face to face.
It's a great part of my job that I, to go to different parts of the island, and even though I've been here 30 years, in the last 10 years working for NFU, I've been down roads and lanes that I didn't know existed on the Isle of Man.
Try being a cyclist.
Yeah. No, I wish I was, but not. So that sort of going out to people, or people coming to us and picking up the phone or coming in for a cup of tea, we try and live by those sorts of. And,
that's
our IT our IT offering isn't as good as it should be on social media and things in it. So
that's okay. I mean,
it's moving to that.
Yeah, well, we shall get some of the links and put them in the show notes so that people can find their way to you. Well, David, it's been really wonderful of you to come into the office today, and
thank you, Sharon. I've enjoyed it.
To find all about you. So thank you. Thanks for taking part in the Island Influencers project.
Thank you very much.